you're now cursed. And if you don't watch this video until the very end, and when I say the very end, even the end credits, you will 100% die. It really sucks. They did the same to me. That's why I created this channel. They were like, oh, you either create a YouTube channel that is gonna really work super well, or we're gonna kill you. And I was like, I mean, if I have to, then I will do it. And as you know, the channel is going really well. So I'm 100% not dead right now.
Oh shit, here we go again. No! God, please, no! No!
When I think summer, I think movie suggestions, because we have maybe sometimes a little bit more time. Maybe it's so hot outside that if you literally put a toe out your door, you're gonna melt, like instantly. Like in a weird science fiction movie from the 60s, you're gonna melt away and everyone will be like, oh my god, oh no! Exactly, right? Can you relate? Can you find it relatable?
Hunter? Go!
Oh my god!
Go stay here, Hunter, no! God, no! Hunter!
So what I do is that I end up going on my couch, sitting there, watching as many movies as possible. And it's kind of like part of my series of my favorite things that most people don't really give a shit about. We're looking at 11 international movies that I love, that are really interesting and really intriguing. Very often when I get into international movies, it's mostly to have something that shakes my head, that is something completely different from like what we consider as traditional Hollywood cinema. That's also why I refuse to call it like foreign movies, because foreign, from whose perspective? I'm Italian / Polish, I live in France, I've lived in England. Like, who is a foreigner at this point? Like, nobody knows and nobody cares. That's why I said international. Let's start with number 11, which is gonna sound like a bit of an exception from your perspective, because you're gonna be like, isn't this like an American thing? But no.
Experience the extraordinary fusion of CG animation and Japanese anime in a groundbreaking collection of 9 animated stories from 7 visionary directors that takes the world of the Matrix to its unimaginable limits.
I'm talking about the Animatrix, which came out in 2003, and it's actually mostly a Japanese project and an anime Japanese project. I discovered it only like literally last year, if I'm not mistaken, and I was astonished by just how good it was. It's almost better than the second movie and the third movie put together. It's so incredibly beautiful, and it really shows the potential behind the Matrix universe, and it really exploits it so well within the animation subgenre. And it's basically a collection of short animated films which fuses together computer graphics and Japanese anime to provide the background of the Matrix universe and the conflict between the man and the machines. And within the Animatrix you can find basically things like Final Flight of the Osiris, the Second Renaissance, which is my favorite and probably everyone's favorite at the end of the day, part 1 and part 2. Then we've got Kids Story, Program, World Record, Beyond, and A Detective Story, and Matriculated. Those are all incredible. Some of them, of course, are kind of weird. The quality is up and down, of course. I'm not saying that you're gonna love every single short. When it comes to anthology films like this, it's almost impossible to vibe with everything. But at the end of the day, it's an incredible experience, especially if you're a fan of cyberpunk, dystopian things, but specifically about the Matrix. This is one of the only films that almost everyone has seen besides me. So let's jump into number 10, which is gonna be a South Korean movie by a director that you probably know, who is called Kim Jun-woon, and I'm talking about the Western, the good, the bad, and the weird. And it is basically the story of 3 Korean outlaws in the 1930s Manchuria and their dealings with the Japanese army and the Chinese and Russian bandits. The good, who is a bounty hunter, the bad, who is a hitman, and the weird, who is a thief, and is played by Sang Kong-ho, who is one of my favorite actors probably ever. They battle the army and the bandits in a race to use a treasure map to uncover the riches of legend. I love this movie mostly because I hate westerns most of the time, and this movie made me fall in love love with westerns again, just because of the South Korean spin, because it has more humor and it feels very genuine. And it also feels like it's kind of like giving that very interesting spin on historical fiction that I love. And South Korean directors do it really well. If you look at Kingdom, for example, the zombie period drama that is really popular on Netflix right now, and it's the only Korean film that I chose for this list, mostly because there is a lot of things that you've probably heard about. They're really good with like psychological thriller and horror movies and Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho, those kind of movies, but I wanted to suggest something that maybe you've never heard about and something that is plain weird and that kind of almost gets close to Japanese cinema just because of how weird and out there it is. Great performances, great action sequences. Honestly, this is one of those fun movies that you just discover and you're amazed by the power of cinema and how it kind of like it is utilized in different ways across different industries. And this is there to prove that international cinema slash foreign cinema doesn't have to be like out there, doesn't have to be art house. It can also be incredibly fun. And there is another example of that coming right after when it comes to French cinema. Let's talk about my number 9, which is gonna be an Italian movie. And when it comes to Italian cinema, there is so much you can choose from. You can go into the art house weird stuff when it comes to Antonioni, Pasolini. You can go into like the Italian post-war cinema as well. And you can go into the weird comedies that are really popular right now and then probably absolutely no one has seen unless you are Italian and you live in Italy.
Oh, mi hai toccato una tetta?
Sì, mi sembrava un gesto coerente col contesto.
Oh my god, that was so funny!
And I wanted to do those hybrids, the movie hybrids that take like an American or English cast, but they give it like a very Italian spin. And I'm talking about Il Racconto dei Racconti, which is directed by Matteo Garrone, and it came out in 2015.
Tu non sai quanto ti ho desiderato.
It's a fantasy movie, the production design is really cool, the tone is incredibly weird as well, and it kind of feels like it's trying to give you a different spin on fairy tales that you might know, but most of the times that you don't know at all because they are very original and specific to certain parts of Italy, and they're not the kind of fables that you've heard from like the Brothers Grimm, for example, or the Disney kind of fairy tales. It is stuff that feels incredibly genuine and incredibly specific, and because of that, it feels original as well. It's one of those films that most people have not watched, even though it has really famous actors in it. And if you love the movies of Guillermo del Toro, you're gonna love this movie as well. And what I like about it is that it's completely different from other stuff that Matteo Garrone has done within his filmography. And I just really love when filmmakers do that. They can challenge themselves to do something completely different and fun at the end of the day. My number 8 is gonna be the most recent movie on my list that came out in 2021/2022, depending on the country releases and stuff like that. I'm talking about Nitram, which is the only, I think, English language movie within my list, so it's the only exception, but it's because it's from Australia and it's directed by Justin Kurzel.
But then I heard someone laughing. I looked around and there he was.
And it's basically based on the true events and a guy called Nitram who lives with his parents in the suburban Australia in the mid-90s, and he lives in a life of isolation and frustration of never fitting in, and as his anger grows, it begins a slow descent into a nightmare that culminates in the most heinous of acts. This really reminded me of Gus Van Sant Elephant in a way that you don't really know exactly what the movie is trying to say. It's not really a biopic, it's not really like one of those crime dramas that try to kind of like give you every single nitpick of information about the crime itself, so you can try to understand everyone's motivations, what happened, etc, etc. This is more of an artistic approach of telling a true life story. It has incredible performances. I really love the cinematography as well. I saw it at the cinema and I was like, why is no one talking about this movie? This feels like a very special movie, and it exists on a completely different level. It's not really art house, but it is definitely independent cinema, and it's almost on no one's like best movie list was from last year or even the year before. So I was like, it deserves a shout out / recommendation. And number 7 is gonna be what I was mentioning before when it comes to giving you movies that are actually quite fun to watch, but they're also a bit out there. I'm talking about Deerskin, aka Le Daim, which is a movie directed by Quentin Dupieux, and it came out in 2019. It stars Jean Dujardin. It's an incredibly weird movie. It's kind of like if you try to make a slasher, like an American slasher, but in France, in the 70s or in the 80s. That's the pitch, basically. This movie is so incredibly weird, and the character at the very center of the story, you don't really know whether you're supposed to root for him or you're supposed to root against him. It's kind of like a weird anti-hero vibes, and you don't really know exactly why he's doing the things that he does, but you're still fascinated by the way that he explains it and the way that he keeps finding ways of kind of like dragging people behind him and motivating other people to follow him as well. It's one of those movies that, like, it's a satire, of course. It's so incredibly funny, but also the kills are really creative and really fun, and it has a very dark humor that probably a lot of people are gonna find almost too dark. If you don't really know Quentin Dupieux's cinema, for me this is one of his most perfect movies. It's always entertaining, and it's that perfect kind of like weirdness that you don't really get that much within French cinema, and you don't really get that much within American cinema either. The only directors that come really close to that might be the Coen brothers, but they stopped making those kinds of movies almost 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
My number 6 is probably something that I've talked about in another video as well, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a movie that I was obsessed with when I was in film school, and it's called Uncle Boonme, The Man Who Could Recall His Past Lives. It's a Thai movie. It's directed by Apichat Pong Weerasethakul, and it won the Palme d'Or in 2010. It's a really weird movie. We're getting into the category of weird movies which can be quite hard to get into for like most people. This is a perfect addition to slow cinema, meaning that you're gonna have a lot of long takes looking at nature, leaves moving, and it's also like addressing a lot of interesting themes when it comes to how Thai people deal with death, with ghosts, and how they try to coexist with like the people that they have lost, basically. It's a very fascinating subject. It's a really long movie though, and you really need to take the time to just take it in and accept it for what it is, which is a really weird contemplational movie. Don't expect like to laugh at it, don't really expect maybe to be disturbed, but some of it is actually quite scary, to be honest, mostly because they linger so much when it comes to certain images and certain like characters as well. It kind of reminds me of certain like Blumhouse Productions movies where they're not relying on jump scares, they just put something in front of you and they just force you to look at it for as long as possible. Let's get into animation again, and my number 5 is gonna be Waltz with Bashir, which is directed by Ari Folman, and it came out in 2008. There are still people out there who haven't seen this movie, and it kind of like blows my mind.
פגישה עם בועז התקיימה בחורף 2006. באותו הלילה, בפעם הראשונה אחרי יותר מ-20 שנה, חטפתי פלשבק נוראי ממלחמת לבנון. לא סתם מלבנון, ממערב ביירות, לא סתם מביירות, מהלילה של הטבח במחנות הפליטים, סברה ושתילה.
This is one of the most beautiful non-Disney animated movies that I've ever seen. I actually have a full breakdown of this movie already in a video that I released a couple of months ago, so I don't want to go too much into details, but I will let you know at least what it is about. And it's basically about the director himself, who is an Israeli army veteran, and he interviews friends and former soldiers about their memories of the 1982 Lebanon War, and especially the Sabra and Shatila massacre in Beirut. And basically the entire movie is kind of like one of those things where you're blurring the line in between fact and fiction, in between the dream world and the things that you actually force yourself to believe, in between nightmares and everyday life, and the things at the end of the day that you want to forget the most. It is a really deep movie, but it's also very entertaining with an incredible soundtrack as well by Max Richter. But if you'd like to know more, I'll just link you to the other review that I mentioned before. Let's stay into animation, but specifically into stop motion animation. It's another movie that I reviewed last year, but not enough people have seen it, and it gets me really mad. And that video actually is one of my most viewed video on my entire channel. But anyways, I'm talking about Junkhead. Which is a Japanese stop-motion animated movie directed by Takahide Ori. It took him such a long time to make. He made most of it by himself, voicing most of the characters as well. In the video that I mentioned, I go into details when it comes to all of the behind the scenes. The thing that I want to remember right now about this movie though, it's that it's dystopian, futuristic, post-apocalyptic. It's incredibly weird like most Japanese animated movies, but it stands out. Like if I'm telling you that if you love anime, for example, and if you watch this movie, you feel like you see the influences, but it feels different as well. And I feel like when it comes to Japanese cinema, it's almost impossible to be surprised just because anime is so completely out there. If you just look at the shows or if you look at the movies, it doesn't really matter. They've tried almost everything to be as disturbing as possible, and Junkhead still managed to surprise me. Just to let you know what your expectations have to be to watch and enjoy this movie. Let's be pretentious again with my number 3, which is gonna be yet another French movie, because I actually really love French cinema in general. It's very varied, there is a lot of stuff going on, even within the horror cinema, but most of it you've heard about it. Things like Julia Ducournau, like Titan, or even like the movie Revenge. So I wanted to go back in time to a simpler time, but I don't want to talk about Jean-Luc Godard because I've talked about him very often on my channel. I want to talk about Agnès Varda and the movie Cléo de 5 à 7.
C'est donc si grave? J'ai vu le cancer, elle est perdue. Si c'est ça, je me tuerais.
Encore un truc pour qu'on te dise qu'on t'aime.
C'est elle, c'est vous, mademoiselle, moi qui aime tant votre voix.
Which is a movie that came out in 1962, and it's just incredible. It's kind of like one of those slice of life movies where you get lost in the stream of consciousness of the main character and you become that character. You embody their persona, their feelings, their worries, their problems so much that you can't distance yourself anymore. And the thing that I love about it is that it takes place in real time. Jean-Luc Godard and Anna Karina are actually in it, and they do some cameos, which is kind of cool when you think about it. It's of course a French New Wave movie, so it's very artsy fartsy. If you don't like that kind of stuff, don't watch it, or maybe be in the perfect mindset to enjoy it. And it's basically a real-time portrait of a singer who is set adrift in the city as she awaits the test results of a biopsy. I feel like we don't talk enough about women filmmakers, and I feel like we don't appreciate enough Agnès Varda's work within the French New Wave, or within just the French cinema just in general. So I wanted to just give her a shout out once again because this movie is incredible. At number 2, I'm gonna put something quite different. It's kind of like riding that line between being artsy fartsy but being incredibly entertaining as well. And I'm talking about the movie A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's directed by Anna-Lily Amirpour. It came out in 2014. Since then, she's made quite a lot of movies, weird movies, of course. And last year, she directed also like one of the main shorts in the Guillermo del Toro Cabinet of Curiosities show. But this movie is incredible. It's kind of like a mix in between a film noir, a vampire movie, and basically takes place in the Iranian ghost town Bad City, a place that reeks of death and loneliness. And the townspeople are are unaware they're being stalked by a lonesome vampire, who of course is a woman, and she's also wearing a veil throughout the entire movie. So a lot of incredible representation and a story that comes out of nowhere, because you don't talk that much about Iranian cinema and even less about women filmmakers within Iranian cinema. I love this movie and I still think about it on an everyday basis, and that's why it's my number 2 favorites at the end of the day. And my number 1 is gonna be the most quintessential movie ever.
Y me has puesto en el polvo de la muerte. Dios mío, ¿por qué me has desamparado?
¿Me amas?
Sí.
Yo no. Para que pueda amarte tienes que ser el mejor. Toma otra vez tu revólver.
I actually haven't seen any other Jodorowsky movie, so it is possible that there is other movies that I'm gonna enjoy even more, but I'm talking about El Topo, which is a movie that came out in 1970. It's up there when it comes to art house stuff. It's so weird, so experimental, but at the same time it is kind of like deconstructing the Western genre. They do everything that you like about art house cinema. They're kind of like playing with the rules of filmmaking. They are working with different jump cuts. They are pushing the violence as well that you're allowed to show on screen or at the cinema for the time, for now as well. It's a really violent movie, and what I love about this movie is that it's kind of like haunting you. Like when you watch it, you keep thinking about it. You keep thinking about the characters and the story, even though it's quite simplistic. Thematically speaking, this movie just lingers. You don't really know what to do with it, and you start to interpret it in so many different ways and enjoy it in so many different ways as well. Of course, this is one of the most difficult movies to watch, I think, in my entire list, because it's not only slow, it's also very weird. So it's kind of like Uncle Boonme put with like any of the other weird movies that I talked about before, mixed together. If you like Salvador Dali's work, you're gonna enjoy El Topo. It's very surrealistic, it's very, very, very weird. But anyways, those are all my recommendations for today's video. Did you enjoy it? Did you survive it? Are you dead right now? Are you just sitting in front of the computer or phone, just dying? I hope you didn't. I hope you aren't dead, just because this video was really good. And I don't want to kill you out of goodness, you know? I don't want to give you an orgasm and then kill you. That would be so weird. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, there is a lot of other stuff you can find on my channel that you might enjoy. As usual, here on the bottom, I'm gonna put all of the stuff that kind of like reminds me of this video here. So if you enjoyed this one, you're gonna enjoy this other videos that you can find on my channel. And as usual, up there, you can find what we're gonna be talking about next week. So don't forget to come back. Don't forget to smash that like button, because every single like that you drop will make sure that someone who watched this video didn't actually die.
Can I count on you?
Keep my fans alive. Keep my viewers alive with those like buttons at the end of the day. I feel like this joke is going too far. Is it going too far? Don't sue me, please. This is just a bit. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
Hey, cool, I'm dead.
Please hold on to the handrail. Do not spit over the side. Por favor, aguántese en la baranda. No escupas en los lados.
Great Grandpa Simpson.
Please hold on to the
Snowball.
handrail. Do not spit over the side. We told you to hold on to the handrail. We asked you not to spit over the side.
Da 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 da